Okay, thank you.
Laura Bennett here. Steve Norman.
Here.
Patrick Lloyd. Christiane Jennings. Maria Deline. Here. Julie Dunkers here. Josie Brown here. Maria Kent here. Katie Cole here. Christine
Here.
I forgot Maria. I knew I didn't.
Yeah, I know, I was introducing everybody. Okay, so we're going to open for public comment, and we'll stay open for public comment during Nick's presentation. A quick introduction. Nick Agnoli is our CRS consultant of Agnoli Engineering. He was instrumental in our appeal of the flood maps and has been guiding the borough with a lot of flood-related issues for almost 10 years now?
Yep.
About 10 years, something like that? Yes. Okay, so motion to open for public comment?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Could you just tell them what CRS is and so they understand?
Did you want to cover any of that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
There's a slide on it as well.
Oh, okay. Well, Nick's going to get into more detail on
That
that.
part's about 45 minutes, man.
Okay. So just real quickly, the CRS program and how Nick Agnoli fits in with the borough. CRS is a community rating system. It's a program by FEMA that assesses the emergency preparedness of a community. It involves a lot of different facets, our fire department, our police department, our emergency awareness, public outreach, and the benefit of the program is we get the discount on our flood insurance. If you've seen on your declarations page, the little note that says CRS discount, and if you are in the 100-year floodplain, it's probably a 25% discount. That's because of the work the borough does to show FEMA how prepared we are to deal with emergency situations. Not exclusively flooding, but including flooding. So, can't talk about CRS without doing our borough clerk. Liz Redness is our CRS coordinator and is really instrumental to us maintaining that rating. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of paperwork. So I just want to say thank you. Now I'm going to turn everything over to Mayor Sarah.
And maybe you explain the highest.
Yeah, we were the first. Nick will cover the rest of the
So welcome everybody. First of all, we have some seats up here if anybody wants to come and sit down. You don't want to stand the whole time. I only got 6, so it's first come, first served. Okay, I just have to give some credit to our Flood Advisory Board in general. Okay, I deal with a lot of towns and a lot of groups. Our Flood Advisory Board has more information than some towns have when it comes to dealing with flooding in our town. You know, it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. We've been doing it a long time here in Pompton Lakes. We've got it down to a science a little bit on how we deal with it with our police, our fire, our first aid, our OEM department. But our board helps us guide that, and they do a lot of work. They spend a lot of time, so I thank the board, and I thank everybody on the board for all the time and effort they put into that. Part of that was today, just today, Congressman Sherrill, who represents us here in town, had a congressional meeting down in Washington, and it was talking just about what we're talking about today: flooding, FEMA mapping, rates, everything that I think Nick is going to mention today. And she actually brought up Pompton Lakes in the talk, so we were brought up on the congressional floor today about flooding, along with some other towns. That's a big step, okay? Because part of the problem, and I was talking to Laura, is the East Coast, the West Coast has to mesh with the rest of the country when it comes to flooding. So our rates are extremely high compared to where other people's rates are. And that's something we're going to address. But one of the points that she brought up today on the floor, which was a great point, which she'd like to see FEMA, a federal agency, reach out to the local agencies, the local towns who have feet on the ground and know about flooding and know what's going on, and kind of interact with them a little bit and talk with them and get some feedback of what's going on. I think that's a big step, because FEMA takes a broad brush when they take care of everything, and they don't really know what's going on in small communities like ours and others. You know, we're not the only community affected by flooding, obviously, down here. So I thank everybody. I'm going to give it over to Nick, and Nick, you describe how you want to do questions or any of that stuff.
Yeah, I thank you, Mayor, and I thank the council and of course the FAB and Liz for all her continual hard work with me over the years to make the CRS program successful, which I'll talk about a little bit there. We have a couple cool brag sheets inside the PowerPoint. But as I go through this, just cut me off and ask questions. I've tried to condense the slides down to far fewer than it was before. You know, it was hours, and I don't think anyone's that tolerant of flood slides other than me. So as I go through these, please feel free to cut me off, and I mean, unless it's derogatory, you tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. But if it's positive, uplifting, please cut me off, and I'll stop, and that's about it.
And again, we have some seats up front here if anybody wants to.
All right, again, I'm Nick Agnoli. Have been working with Pompton Lakes for about 10 years on the floodplain management side, and I was asked tonight, specifically by the mayor and also by the FAB, to go over the maps that are going to become effective on April 17th. So the couple numbers you want to remember tonight. The most important one I'd say is April 17th, 2020, because that's when the mapping in the community changes. Uh-oh, I got to suck it in. Thank you. I broke the keto diet. It was awful. I really tried. Really tried. 16 grams of carbs. Give me a break. All right. Again, these are the preliminary maps. So the one thing I always like to highlight when you pull a set of maps is you always want to go right to the effective date. That on the maps is on the bottom right corner. On the flood insurance study is on the bottom left. I'm going to go over in a second where this is on the website, and just so we all speak the same language, on the next slide I'll go over some of the acronyms. Thank you. Is that it?
I killed it. There you go.
Oh, come on, I'm doing a good job.
We're getting to it. We're getting to it.
All right, you get to it.
Netflix, really? All right. Stranger Things.
I got a hammer out in the car, fixed it right up for you.
I thought I was doing all right. That was a big thumbs down.
That was quick, too. 1 minute, and you were out.
I only got 2 hours left. I'm almost there. Is it up? What happened? Well, it wasn't me.
I played with those.
All right. So anyway, in just a moment you'll see it. Do I have to?
Yeah.
It's like a flapper valve. I got to jiggle the handle.
Yeah, come on out. Step up.
I killed it.
Just,
It was up.
You okay?
Yeah, that's fine. It was set.
So while they're fixing this, I'm also going to acknowledge that Councilman Bennett does generally provide tech support for the flood advisory board.
I don't want this to happen.
All different manner of support
Yeah.
issues, and we
Oh, it
appreciate
should
that.
detect it.
Is Ted biased on that, Lauren?
In-house tech support.
So for the new people that are here, while he's getting this up, you know, like I said before, our OEM, which is run by Al here, and our police and fire, you know, they've been through this before, our flooding, you know, knock on wood, we haven't flooded, but a lot of the hard work that the council and the mayor and the flood advisory board have done with these nuisance floods, which we'll call the smaller floods, we haven't seen them as much as we should. But that's because we've been cleaning the debris and the silt out of the rivers. Okay? If every town was able to do that from here to the bay, the water would flow better down to the bay. The problem is, one town decides they don't want to do it, and it just starts to back up. We did such a good job this year, I won't mention large municipalities that called me, that said, what are you guys doing in Pompton? You're making us flood downriver. Okay? We're not making anybody flood back downriver. What we're doing is trying to get the water that's in our community to flow down to the bay. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. Now, those are for the nuisance floods, the small floods. Obviously, when a big event happens, there's not much that we can do for that. But we are prepared with our OEM, our police, fire, first aid. They know how to handle the situations. People that have been in town a long time will tell you, we've done a good job in handling that. We're not going to say we're going to cure flooding. That's not what this is all about. You know, the bigger storms are going to hit us. When that happens, it will happen. We're trying to get rid of those nuisance floods. And, you know, last year was a wet year. You know, if you remember back last year, there was a lot of rain. I don't think we flooded once. When I say flooded, water coming out of the banks of the river. We had some water in the street at one point. I should mention also that I actually do live in a flood zone too, just in a different area. I live on the north side, but it's in a flood zone. So I'm very familiar also with the flooding that's going on in town. So at the end of the day, people who are paying flood insurance and people who are not, that's what this meeting is about. To identify what the changing flood maps are and why they did what they did and how we move forward from there. This is not a negotiation at this point. The flood maps are taking effect April 17th, the new flood maps. This is countrywide. They are going to be in effect. I'm sure Nick will talk about it. We did hire our own experts to kind of argue about how the maps work in Pompton Lakes. We got some good results out of that, but unfortunately FEMA didn't want to spot clean one little area and say, we'll fix that. So, again, FEMA does things with a sweeping brush. They do everything to cover the whole county, the whole country. They're not really worried about one little spot on the map like Pompton Lakes. But we, of course, here living, we are. You know, most communities below us are flooding. You know, I've had meetings, numerous meetings in the last 6 months with mayors of all the communities, and the number one thing next to taxes that comes up is flooding. All the mayors are talking about how do they fix flooding. If people know in Woodland Park, we had that big storm that came through and took all the cars out and washed them down the river there. Believe it or not, they are addressing that with Army Corps of Engineers, and they're going to build some detention basins and things to fix that down there. I'm sure Nick will talk about the Army Corps, though, who runs our dam here in town. Okay? We don't have control of the dam. We have no say on how that works. I do get calls from other communities saying, did you just open the dam down here, we're flooding? I don't have a button under my desk that says, open the dam and all the water goes flowing down. The Army Corps uses computer models to figure how that works. When that happens, and you guys in the South End especially know how that water rises very quickly when that happens. What they're trying to do is model that so they can let it out, close it, let it out, close it, where the water goes up, doesn't come out of the river, and then goes back down again, and then they open it again. So that's what they're trying to do with the dam. It has gotten better in the last couple of years. You know, the people who've been here a while remember when they used to open those dam gates, water came down like a tidal wave and flooded the streets and flooded everything. It hasn't happened that way so far. So it's a work in progress with that. Just like this, what are we doing here, Nick? How are we doing?
I don't know. Steve, it's all you, man.
Why don't you start talking and then...
Let me know.
I can only stall for so long.
He has it all on there.
You want to talk in general about it?
Honestly, it's hard to do without the presentation. I'll wait for a second.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Al Evangelista, OEM Coordinator. Just a reminder, next Wednesday, right here in this room, hopefully we have the same crowd.
It says March 27th.
We will be having our annual Emergency Management Awareness Seminar. We've been doing that every year now. We get credit for it on our plan. We are a storm-ready community because it's one of the things that we do. Public information is key to getting points for that community rating service plan. In essence, what that does, the more points we have, the lower your insurance rates are. You get a discount based on the work that this borough does through the Flood Advisory Board, the Mayor and Council, OEM. You get a discount on your insurance rates. As a result of that, we were down to what was our percentage?
25%.
25%. A lot of communities don't see that and never will. But I know the Mayor and Council can spend a lot of money in rivers. We've reached out to our elected representatives and we get good help from them. So we hope now that you know what to do in the event of any emergency. Next Wednesday is not just about flooding. As a matter of fact, we'll probably not even talk about it. Because we kind of like, you know, that's the highlight every time we meet. It's more about other emergencies we're looking at that we're seeing more and more of now with climate change, whether you believe it or not. We are seeing more wind events.
All right, that's one. We're good.
All right. That's it.
Oh, we're going to the dance people.
Thanks, Nick. Next act, number 2. Number 3.
All right, no offense. All right, now, where were we? Yes, about me. No, I'm kidding. All right, with regard, again, so these are obviously the new dates in the map. So again, just be very cautious when using the maps or when talking to an insurance company that they're using the effective as of April 17th, 2020. A couple terms for tonight. I want to make sure everybody, because engineers love acronyms, and we also love using, you know, floodway, flood fringe. Just to go over the terminology a little bit, this is the only slide where I do this. FIS is flood insurance study. The FIS, if ever there's a disagreement between elevations, between the flood insurance study and the flood insurance rate map, the flood insurance study is the one you go to. That's the one that shows the profiles. That gives a much more accurate elevation. And the reason I bring up the flood insurance study is because if you're down to a game of inches, you're 0.2 feet, you know, you're 2 or 3 inches into a flood zone. by elevation, you want to use the flood insurance study. They're more accurate. You can go to kind of a finer level of detail. Flood insurance rate maps, those are the things that we all know. Those are the things we look up online, also known as firms. Floodplain. The floodplain is that, this is a very important differentiation. Because one of the big changes that's going on right now, as we know in Pompton Lakes, is the floodway has gotten larger. Okay? There's a lot of concerns about that. The floodway is your high velocity section of the river, all right? That's your middle section. Where the floodplain is that green line that's everywhere. That's what FEMA looks at. That's that 100-year boundary, all right? That's the two blue lines that we're all worried about that pulls our homes in. So if you get pulled into a floodway, you have to remember we serve kind of two masters, right? We have the DEP and we have FEMA. FEMA's concerned with the two blue lines. FEMA's concerned with the floodplain. When it comes to building in a floodway, that's where DEP takes over.
Just tell them what the DEP is, Department of Environmental Protection. It's a state organization here in the state that does it.
Yep. DEP, they're your environmental police. So you got the 100-year floodplain, which is FEMA, and you got the floodway, which is heavily regulated by the DEP. So if you get pulled into a floodway, realize it will not dramatically impact your flood insurance, but it will significantly impact your ability to make improvements. And I'm going to go through that in a minute, what kind of restrictions are placed on you, but also how you can get around some of those restrictions and still be able to use some of your property. So again, those of you pulled into a floodway, that's that center blue part. Those in the floodplain, that will affect your insurance because you have to carry it now if you have a mortgage, right, federally backed loan. That's the green line. So floodway and flood fringe, just to make it more confusing, is the area between the floodway and the floodplain. That's it. Floodplain, floodway, flood fringe. Say that 3 times. All right. Now, do the maps change? The short answer is yes. We got about 2,000 acres in this community, okay? Now, the flood zone didn't change all that much. There was a lot of concerns that the flood zone had gotten dramatically larger. It actually has not. The flood zone actually stayed almost about the same. It went from about 33% of the land here to about 33% of the land here. And I'm going to show the maps in a minute. You're going to note that there's not a big change to the limits of the flood zone, which means for flood insurance purposes, it shouldn't bring that many additional homes in. So that really isn't our problem that we want to discuss in detail tonight. The problem is the floodway. The floodway, from the prior maps, 2007 maps, went from being about 285 acres to about 500 acres. And the issue that creates is if you want to put an addition on, or you want to build a fence, or you want to have a doghouse, or a shed, or a pool, and again, we'll talk about that in a minute. And that added almost 350 homes to the regulated floodway. All right? Now, for those of you who are do-it-yourselfers and you wanted to take a look at the maps yourself, this link, I believe, will be on the FAB site. And this is where you can see the new maps. Well, you can't, but I can. I'm kidding. That's weird. Just pretend. No, on that link I just showed you, that'll take you over to FEMA's Flood Map Service Center. And at the Flood Map Service Center, let me get back to that link. Give me 1 second.
I think we have it on, don't we have it on our page? We do. We have it on our page.
What you do there is you just enter in your address, and when you go there and you enter your address, it's going to take you to a nice map, and at that point you can then look at the, and I'll put a step-by-step up there. It's not that simple. I'll put the steps, but pretty much all these maps are available online, and you can see for yourself.
You can do that actually on our web page, right, directly from the web page.
Even better. So again, all these maps are now available online. Okay, here's the change. Blue is 2007, red is 2020. 2020, the maps become effective in about a month. So if you'll note, it's what I just talked about. It hasn't gotten that much bigger. And the reason I put the red over the blue is because the original flood zone actually creeps out a little bit up above and it actually got a little smaller. So when you get a little higher up into the north in Pompton Lakes, the actually original flood zone is a little bit bigger. We'll talk about floodway as well. Now, here I'm over in the Wanakee River section, okay? So I'm in the northwest section of Pompton Lakes. And this kind of highlights the problem for the residents. I know it's a lot of information on one map, but it's all useful information, so I just kind of threw it all up here. If you look at the black area and you look at the blue area, that's the flood plain. And as I said before, you can see here in the higher level detail, it hasn't changed all that much. But what has changed, if you look at the red area is the new floodway. The old floodway is that kind of those lines going right down the middle. The area that's not shaded in black going right down the middle of the Wanakee River, that's the old floodway, and again, the new one is the red one, and that's gotten much larger. And now, if you look at elevations, the elevations on a lot of this river haven't changed all that much either, because that affects how much you pay for flood insurance. That affects those of you who have, how many here have an elevation certificate? Okay. That'll be something where, when the maps change, you do need a revised elevation certificate. Okay? For those of you who have benefited from an elevation certificate, whether it pulled you out of the floodplain or reduced your insurance that you have to pay, my first recommendation is go scramble and get a new EC, because your insurance company could come back and say, oh, you know, your whole elevation certificate's outdated, and not tell you this, and just, yes?
That comes in now. When you say outdated, how old is?
Any elevation certificate older than 2 months from now is outdated. Because as of April 2020, the elevation certificate has to reflect the new mapping.
I got a question on that. I know some surveyors, once it became obvious that these maps were going to come to pass, started including a notation of the BFE that was to come on that. If a resident has an elevation certificate that makes mention of the new BFE, is it worth arguing with the insurance, do you
Yes.
think, to
Yes.
try to say, I don't need to go and...
Yeah, save yourself some money. I would argue and say it's reflected by a licensed professional surveyor that the new elevation is wide. Yes?
We got a letter from FEMA suggesting we get a flood elevation certificate for face, I think it was a 37 or 18% increase every year indefinitely on our flood insurance. I got the flood certificate done, and our insurance company said, don't hand it in yet, because it would raise your rate so much, don't do it. So I only got it last year, because FEMA told me to get it. Now I gotta get another one?
The elevation, again, just so I'm clear, because I don't want to misspeak, the elevation certificate needs to reflect the new mapping. The new mapping is not going to become effective until April 2020. Now, if your surveyor used the new maps, because new maps have been on the street for a couple of years now, the version I had that I had to change up for this presentation was dated 2017. These maps have been out for a while, they just haven't been effective. So your surveyor may have used the preliminary maps. That's something you'd have to look at the elevation certificate to check, because it would reflect, it'll have the date of the mapping. If it says 2007, another good number, I lied. I said there's two numbers you need to remember. The prior effective maps were from 2007. The new ones are 2020. When you look at your EC, it will have one of those two numbers. If it has another number, you're probably in the wrong town. So 2007 is the prior version, 2020 are the new maps. The reason the EC is of your benefit is because if the insurance company does not know what your elevation is, they will assume it's the worst one. Okay? They default down to, I think it's 4 feet below the BFE, base flood elevation. So again, an EC rarely can hurt you. I'm actually surprised you got that advice. An elevation certificate very, very rarely hurts you. And, I'm sorry?
It hurt me.
Oh, man.
So,
This is
Nick, let me
exceptional.
just jump in here. We do have someone in Borough Hall here. If you have a question about where your house sits, that you can come talk to. He's in our building department. His name is Sal Pauly. He's
Yep.
here from 3:30 to 6:30 most days. You'd have to call and make an appointment because he's also an inspector. But if you have a question about your personal property, about where it sits, and just the things you're asking now, he'd be the best person to go and talk about your personal property, about what we're doing. We're trying not to talk about personal property at this meeting. This is a general meeting of just general knowledge. If you have an idea of your own property and you want to talk about it, more than welcome to make a call to the town hall, set up an appointment, and come talk to him.
Now, that's for elevation, for the elevation certificate, right? The benefit of having that is it gives a more accurate elevation of your first finished floor. The one downside is if you have an elevation certificate that is showing that you should be in the floodplain but you are not, I would keep that to yourself. I would keep that elevation certificate to yourself. That's your business. You're not obligated to turn those in. So again, if a land surveyor said you were Zone X, but with this certificate you're now in an A or an AE zone, which is a floodplain in this town, I would keep that or recycle it. Either way. Okay, so looking back at now, I talked about BFE, base flood elevation. The base flood elevation is the elevation that your finished floor has to be above for your house to be out, right? So if you look at this, it's kind of hard to see from the back, so you got to just believe that I'm not lying to you. The numbers haven't changed a ton. You know, if you look at the middle, it's 193 before, it's elevation 193 now. You go a little farther south, it was 190. It was previously. Let me get this right. It would have been 190. It's 193 now, it's 192 before, so it's gone up by about a foot. But here's what's interesting, and this is why I am a proponent of elevation certificates. The elevation has changed, but if you look, the extents haven't changed. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? If it got higher, if the flood got higher, why didn't it get wider? Okay, so on the other side, it's the same thing. So if you have been pulled into the flood zone, I would strongly suggest that you get an elevation certificate. If you're one of the few homes that have been pulled into the flood zone.
Which I will say I am one of those homes.
Yeah,
I'm in a floodplain, and now I am in the floodway. So I am pulled in.
Because, Mayor, something to me just doesn't jive as an engineer. I'm looking at this and I'm like, wait a second, the elevation has changes, but the extent hasn't changed. That's impossible. If it got a foot deeper, it should have gotten wider, but it didn't. There you go. Moving along, we are now, we're down below Pompton Dam, and if you look over on this side, it's kind of the same thing. You look at the new numbers, 190, the old numbers, 189. You look at the new numbers, 189, old numbers, 187. 2 foot difference, still hasn't gotten any wider. Okay, so again, I would say, before anyone gets too worried about all these new maps are going to pull me in, they're going to change so much, again, even though the flood depths have gotten higher, because that was the word on the street. The word on the street was, oh God, the new maps are 2 feet higher than the old maps. Yeah, but they didn't get any wider in most cases. So for a lot of people, you are not going to get pulled in. Because I can tell you this, unless that new black line grabs you, the new blue line grabs you, it doesn't matter what your elevation is. If that blue line doesn't hit your home, it doesn't matter. You could be 4 feet underground, you're fine. Okay? For flood insurance purposes.
Now, one of the questions we get asked a lot, Nick, is what part of your property has to be in to be pulled in?
That's a great question. Okay, so if your property, if you're fortunate and you've done very well in life and your property is 5,000 acres, okay, and the blue line clips the edge of your property's in. But your structure doesn't necessarily have to be in, okay? So, but the problem is the insurance companies like to keep it easy. They just look you up by lot and block. They said, oh, okay, that block is in, you need flood insurance. But on that 2,000-acre property, you might be off in a corner up on a hill. That's the benefit of the elevation certificate. That's why I'm a proponent, because the elevation certificate would say, wait a second, the flood elevation on that property is 189, your finished floor is at 220. There's no way, and so then, again, you will not require flood insurance, okay, because your finished floor is above the base flood elevation.
But you have to prove that, but with this
You do.
elevation.
You do.
Right. So just so everybody understands, if in that situation, if just a corner of your property is in, you need to get a certificate to prove your house is not in, and then you have a fight to say, I don't need flood insurance if that's what you want.
And the elevation certificate by itself is not enough, however. You say, well, then how do I get out? How do I get out of this mess with FEMA? How do I get out of this mess with my insurance company? You need to file what's called a letter of map amendment. Now, whoever prepares the elevation certificate for you, the survey company, the licensed survey company, they should be able to handle LOMA for you very simply. If you start getting some sort of crazy story, please reach out to me. My contact information is at the end. LOMA takes about 15-20 minutes. You can do it yourself. You can file it online. Again, I'm happy to walk you through it. Reach out to me by email. All you do is you take your elevation certificate. I need a stamped copy of your deed. Okay, you can get that online now in Passaic County. You'll need, I think, a road map showing where your house is, and then you file what's called a LOMA, Letter of Map Amendment. What you're saying is, and it's called out as seen. What you're saying is it's obvious. You're saying that blue line doesn't come anywhere near my house. It might hit my property, but it's nowhere near my house. So it's OAS, out as seen. If you look at the map, it clearly shows your house is nowhere near it, and you got an elevation certificate, you're good. Make sense? Good. That makes sense occasionally. All right. Now I'm getting down toward the bottom now. Here I go. I'm going down Rampo River. I got Pompton River coming in along my west. And here, when we get down to the lower sections of the river, again, this is where there was a lot of concern before, because the old maps are showing 186, elevation 186 above sea level, right? The new maps are showing 188 above sea level, and you're like, oh, good God, that must have spread out a lot. It barely spread out at all. And in fact, a lot, if you look at the maps, see those little fingers coming out? It's just following the roads. It's not picking up houses there. So if your property gets clipped, like let's say you live on Maple Avenue, and you're like, I wasn't in the flood zone before, but now my insurance company says I am. You're probably out as seen. It's showing the road is in the floodplain. So be advised that you're not in any kind of substantial trouble if you get a phone call and you're on Maple Avenue or Walnut Avenue or Laurel Avenue, because a lot of these streets here, the roads are getting picked up, not the houses. Make sense? Okay, so I'm in the new floodway. So for those of you who get into that red section, that floodway section, what does that do to you? And why is it important for you to know whether or not you're in a floodway? Okay, higher flood insurance, not really. Higher and stricter DEP, Department of Environmental Protection Standards, yes. So when you go to get a building permit, okay, because we have a floodplain management program in Pompton Lakes, and every community in the state has a floodplain management program. For a lot of things you want to do, people are going to want to see a DEP permit, okay? And development within a floodway is severely restricted. That is true. I'll show you in a slide from now what that means. And only development that must occur within the floodway is permitted. Bridges, culverts, outfalls. New buildings are prohibited. So what this is really saying is if the floodway goes through your property, you really can't expand your house, and there's not a lot of construction. Let's say it's undeveloped. An undeveloped property in a floodway is nearly undevelopable. Okay, so if you own a piece of property in the floodway, it's very, very hard to put anything on there other than like an essential public service, like a culvert or a bridge, and even those are heavily regulated in a floodway. So, and for the purposes of this conversation, the floodway is pretty much the area closest to the stream. It's the area that a lot of people here would understand, I can't build there because that's where the swift water comes. For those of you who lived here during Irene in 2011, where the water was really cooking through, 5 feet per second, 10 feet per second, that's the floodway. In the areas where the water was just kind of stagnant and just moving through fences and down streets, that's the flood fringe. That's the kind of the backwater, the slow water movement. So, can I build anything? Again, you're pretty much limited here. I'm not going to go through every single thing you can and cannot build, but just there are pretty severe restrictions. For instance, chain link fence are prohibited, lattice fence are prohibited, picket fences are prohibited. Any fencing that can block flows of water are not permitted in a floodway, and the reason that causes some problems is because, let's say you have a dog, right? You have a dog and you want to fence the dog in, it becomes difficult, and a lot of those people, though, you have to go to like an invisible fence. Not as a joke, like the invisible fence company where they have the collar. Okay. We call those like weekend and night permits. But no, it's a visible fence. Swimming pools, again, nothing above ground. You are allowed to build a swimming pool, but it has to be a grade, so it doesn't block. So pretty much, to simplify it, in a floodway, you can't fill it at all. You can't put anything in a floodway where if I'm water, I would see it. I'd have to bang into it to get around it. That's
and one of the things to make everyone understand, normally if you weren't in the floodway, you would come to the town hall, say you want to put a fence, you'd get a permit, and we'd say okay to that, and you would do that. Now, because you're in the floodway, we can't say okay to that. So you have to go to the DEP and ask for them for a permit. Now, if guys are familiar with the DEP, not the friendliest group in the world, okay, they're not going to just...
Except my wife.
Except your wife, except his wife. They're not just going to issue a permit, and you probably have a good chance of not getting a permit to do what you're asking. So that's the big difference.
Excuse me, now what about pre-existing structures? So be it fences, railroad,
great question.
retaining walls?
Maintenance is permitted. If you were to go in there and it was an in-kind replacement, I don't see an issue there. I just had that issue. That's a great question. Let me give an example, actually. Thank you. Oakland, New Jersey. Somebody had a shed upright. It was definitely in the floodway, and they wanted to put a new shed in. And I'm the floodplain manager in Oakland, and I allowed that because they had a concrete slab already in place. The shed, it was 1-to-1. It was an 8x10 being replaced with an 8x10. And I said that's no new fill, right? They're not filling it with anything new.
Now, if they wanted a 10x10 on that 8x10,
you can't expand.
So that's a good example. You wouldn't be able to put a bigger shed there.
But yeah, same thing with the chain link fence. If you had a dog, for instance, and chain link fence in place, and you want to put a new chain link fence in, that would be fine. Same thing with you can because there was a rumor out there that you couldn't do any kind of paving at all. That's not true. Same thing. You have pavement there, you can repave. Man, I really got into it here. Okay, we don't need to do all of this. Okay, this again, you're allowed to elevate a property and that sort of thing.
You didn't talk about pools. You just want to mention pools?
Oh, pools. Yeah, again, if you go to permit by rule 20. Oh, this is important. Okay. When I say permit by rule, what that means is you don't need a permit. If you comply with the permit by rule, you don't have to submit anything to the DEP. It's very confusing with DEP. There's this group of permits called permits by rule, which are funny because you don't have to submit a permit if you comply with the permit by rule. So, like that, huh? Yeah. Permit by certification is different. I'm not going to talk about those. But permit by rule, as long as you comply with those standards, you don't have to submit anything to DEP. And all you do on something like that is just what I did. I did something on my property where I needed a permit by rule, right? ironically. And so honestly, I just drew a little plan up. I made a checklist out of the requirements, and I just put it in the drawer. So if somebody ever say anything, I'd say, no, at the standards of the day, it was like 2015. I said I met, because I have a stream in my backyard. I'm like, I met all their standards. Is there a question? Yes.
Just to clarify, these restrictions are in place for people that are in a floodway.
Correct. That's another good question. The entire floodplain is regulated by the DEP. Okay, there are restrictions as what you can place in terms of fill. The reason I'm bringing up floodway is the floodway has the greatest level of restriction. Pretty much anything that blocks flow is not permitted. Where in the floodplain, you can do things that block flow, as long as you're showing that it doesn't endanger anyone else, you're not increasing flooding and that sort of thing. Where in a floodway, it's a no. In New Jersey, it's just called a no-fill. You can't add anything to block. The oddity is what's considered fill. Above ground pools are fill. Tanks, above ground storage tanks, solar panels. In fact.
So an above ground pool you would not be able to put in a floodway?
These are in the rule, and I think some of them perhaps are taken out of context, but I read it carefully, and it actually lists toys. So, Army figures, for instance. I have 3 boys. I mean, I'd violate half the things on here. But, yeah, no tanks, no fill, no solar panels, no lawn and garden equipment, no shelters for animals, no trash. So there's a lot of things. So what it's saying is, again, that's all considered fill by the DEP.
So I'm in a floodway because I am right near the stream. So you're saying I can't have patio furniture?
I am saying, by the letter of the law, if for some reason you came in for a permit to have patio furniture, you'd have a problem. Now, if you had patio furniture out there, I'd say you're probably just fine.
So let's read into that a little bit. So that's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay? Obviously, this is what the law says you can't do. Having a movable piece of patio furniture, I think you could probably bend that rule a little bit, okay, because it's movable. But by law, by what they're stating, you can't have a toy in the backyard. Yes, that is correct. So if someone had a toy, are the police coming and arresting you? Probably not.
I'm assuming the toys you're talking about the swing set for the children.
I wish it said more. It said toys, but that's what it said. I don't know what they consider toys. Maybe there's a size limit to the toys. Maybe action figures that are big. I don't know. But to stay focused, it's you can see the majority of this is obvious. The majority of this you can see would be considered a fill. But I would say common sense has to take hold. Like trash receptacle in a park in a floodway. I say unless you're getting a DEP permit for some reason, I think that might be perfectly fine. I can't see that upsetting the Pompton River. Okay, any good news? Because so far I've been a typical engineer where I tell you all the horrible things in the world, and you're gonna have the coronavirus and everything else and mapping, and this is what's good. The actual extent of the 100-year special flood hazard area, the 100-year floodplain, has actually not gotten all that much bigger. So for all of you who had heard it, it's gotten a lot higher, accurate, but it hasn't gotten much wider, which doesn't make a lot of technical sense to me, which is why I'm a proponent of elevation certificates. The way you used to be able to get out of them, which is a letter of map amendment, are still a very effective way to do it. That rule hasn't changed. If it clips a corner of your property, but your house is not in a flood plain, you don't need flood insurance. You just have to do a letter of map amendment via out as seen, OAS. Okay, so that's a great thing to do. I always tell my clients before you panic, make sure that line, when you look that line up tonight on the Map Service Center, if that line doesn't hit the house in any way, that's a no-brainer. Still doesn't mean you need insurance. Elevation certificate's your next level. So to go through kind of order of operation, first make sure that blue line grabs you. If that blue line misses your house, you probably have no problem at all, and you're just going to follow the LOMA. Now, if that blue line grabs your house and you're like, I don't like that, get an elevation certificate. Beyond that, make sure you're not in the floodway. So there's really 3 steps for tonight. So one, if that floodplain doesn't clip my home, I'm probably fine, because that's what Nick said, and he thinks he knows stuff. And then second, if it does clip my house, I want an elevation certificate because I want to know how bad I'm off. Is it I'm 4 feet above the BFE, the base flood elevation? Well, then I'm fine. I don't need insurance. Or am I 3 feet below? Well, then I do need insurance. That doesn't help me at all. And the surveyor made $500. And then the last one is, am I in the floodway? Because if you're in the floodway, that's when you start getting restrictions to what you can do with your property. Now, positive news. Borough floodplain residents, and I'm talking about this one, pay the lowest non-coastal flood insurance in New Jersey. And that is due to the hard work of the borough. If you ever see Liz, and we get audited every 3 years at audit season, she's running around frantically because she is a huge part of why we maintain a 25% discount in the borough. The Flood Advisory Board is also very active in working with us. They do a lot of they help us with outreach and that sort of thing. So because the borough, and I just want to give kind of kudos where they are due, because this borough is extremely committed to doing this sort of thing and spends a lot of time and money maintaining their community rating system, or CRS rating, we do have the lowest flood insurance in the state here in the borough of Pompton Lakes, and you guys have been recognized for that before. The savings, just to put some numbers on it, is $265,000 a year for residents. It's about $500 per policy, and again, that's because you are a voluntary member of the FEMA community rating system. So, one thing that this community should be very proud of is how hard your volunteer board and Liz work to make sure that you stay in the good graces of FEMA and keep your insurance rates low.
And it's not an easy thing. It's a lot of paperwork.
It's
And
crazy.
Nick puts a lot of time into this too.
Yeah.
It's time and hours, and you make one little mistake, they'll throw you out of that level and you'll drop to the next. So it is a lot of time-consuming work. And we do have one of the best ratings, I think, of the east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, you have one of the best in the east of Mississippi.
East of the Mississippi. That's pretty impressive for
For a non-coastal community, that's true. And you pay some low insurance in the country. I would, again, you know, what does the community do that's so great? I mean, your maintenance, your systems is second to none. I mean, you guys do more stream cleanouts than anybody I can think of in North Jersey. I mean, you guys always seem to be doing something with one of your rivers, and that sort of effort definitely reduces what we call nuisance flooding, which are smaller storm events. You guys have a great response and recovery program. You have a great OEM. No, I do this in 21 communities, and you guys are definitely a standout. What other good news are there? I got to bring you something. All right, borough's appealing. Mayor. If you want to jump in anytime on this one, please feel free. Right now, the borough is appealing how the floodway increases have occurred. Because I don't want to go too far into the technical, but as I showed you before, your floodplain hasn't gotten too much bigger, right? Even though the elevations have gotten a little higher, that doesn't make sense. We'll fight that one later. But the floodway has gotten significantly larger. There's sections where the floodway used to be about 400 feet wide along the river. Now it's 2,000 feet wide. And that change is because of the method they're using to calculate it, not how much water is going down the river. So right now, the borough has retained Joe Scooping, who's one of the foremost hydrologists around, and he is fighting not with FEMA, but with the DEP. Why? Because the DEP is the one who's going to restrict what you can do in that floodway. So the borough right now is aggressively working with the DEP to work at reducing that floodway back down to what is a reasonable width. So don't consider this a loss. You know, this isn't, oh well, you know, FEMA changed the floodway, what are we going to do? Well, what happened, for instance, in another community who's doing something similar to the borough, is they also fought the floodway, and they said they did not do it with FEMA, they did it with the DEP, and in one section along the Passaic actually reduced the size of the floodway back down to where it was years ago. It's by GIO Auto Salvage on Route 46, if you guys know the area.
So one of the things we're trying to work with, what Nick was mentioning, is to try to bring the permitting or pieces of the permitting back to the town. So if you wanted to do some of that furniture or stuff you were talking about, we would say in our flood management locally you can do that, and so you don't have to go to the DEP. We're in negotiation with the DEP right now. Again, a very hard group to change their mind, but the expert we hired, you know, did show that the modeling they're using is outdated, and if they spot checked it all over the country, they could probably change things. But like I mentioned in the beginning, FEMA does everything with a grand sweep. They don't do spot checking. So our expert is trying to say, but if you really look at the numbers, you're incorrect in Pompton Lakes. Federal government doesn't really want to bend to Pompton Lakes too much, but we're trying. We're trying the hardest we can to do that. The best we get is getting permitting put back to us. That's a win. That's a big win.
So again, from the perspective, thank you, Mayor. From the perspective of the borough, again, because for those of you impacted in this room by the floodway, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the flow in the rivers hasn't gone up that much since they calculated the 100-year, right? And the area of the floodplain hasn't gotten much wider. Why is the floodway suddenly becoming a lot larger? Because the way the floodway is calculated, it's simply, again, it's the section of the river that's most important. It's a section of the river that if you block it, it starts raising the level of the water rapidly. And that's how it's been calculated since the 1970s. And all of a sudden, when they came out with the new maps, it got much, much wider. And so to a lot of engineers like myself, it just didn't make any sense. We're like, well, wait, if the flows haven't changed all that much, even post-Irene, the flows haven't changed all that much in the rivers, what the 100-year is, right? And then if you're not getting much wider, why is a floodway suddenly getting so much bigger? So that's the fight going on right now, not at the FEMA level, but at the DEP level, and that's ongoing. So that's my update on that.
Excuse me. Now, for the houses that were taken down, say, after Irene.
Yeah.
I think that was Blue Acres.
Blue Acres Hunter,
Yeah.
Okay.
and HMGP, yeah.
Yeah. Now, so that land, those lots will never be built on.
Right.
Does that factor into the equation
That's a
at
good
all?
question. The short answer is it's supposed to. When it was modeled, those areas should be treated differently, right? Because it's now wooded, there's no impervious cover.
Right.
Now, I would say, the mayor said it best, when they look at it from a 50,000-foot view, right? So at that level, no, not really. However, if we go to a house-by-house fight on a line, moving a line in and out, that's where your engineer is going to say, oh yes, it absolutely does make a difference. Because if you used to have 5 neighbors and now you have 1, yeah, we'll fight that this water surface elevation probably has gone down a little bit, it may have moved in a little bit. Okay, so that's a very good question.
So just so everybody gets a question about those homes that came down. They came down through grant money through either FEMA, the federal department, or the State Department. There's restrictions on those properties. We can do nothing with those properties. They have to go back to what's called natural state. We can't build a park there. We can't build anything there. They won't let us use it for anything. We've even tried to park cars along Carlo Field where they took the houses out over there. They told we couldn't use it as a parking area. So there's a lot of restrictions that come with when you take those houses down.
And if I may also, that does factor in another very positive note. You know, when Liz compiles a list of open space and presents it to FEMA, that's part of the reason you have your discount on flood insurance. Because what we've done is we've added up the acreage of all the open space in the borough versus how much floodplain you have in the borough, and because the percentage is so high of what you've protected from development, the flood insurance costs have come down. So I should have mentioned that before. One of the huge programs in the borough is your open space in the floodplain, and that's been significant. That's recognized. I mean, that probably moved you a whole class in the CRS, which is another 5% off your flood insurance. So that your open space program is very, very successful in terms of getting your flood insurance rates down. Now, I'm not saying flood insurance is great and it's cheap. It's not cheap, but at least it's less expensive than it is before. I have flood insurance myself, so I'm with you on this one.
Excuse me. Does anybody know when the 25% increase every month is going to be cut off?
25% a month?
25% a year.
Oh.
It's going up 25% per year.
Yeah, those are the old the rates. If you had it was the pre-firm rates. Some of them probably had that. I had a property that had those. So if you're paying like $400 for flood insurance, for instance, you had the old preferred rate, and that went away. Those were grandfathered in, and unfortunately, when they changed the laws, and I think it was 2014, that went away, and that will go up until it hits the same rate as everyone else. So the people that are paying a 25% increase per year, it should be for only 4 years, and then it should stop. Because what happens is they're bringing you up to the same rate as all of your neighbors. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Well, Nick, I have a question about that, and I'll use myself as an example. I don't get the 25% discount from the FEMA, from the CRS, because I'm grandfathered into an older rate.
Exactly.
So what does that mean? So explain that.
Okay, right. So right now, the only people that benefit, which is the majority of us, the only people that benefit from the 25% reduction in flood insurance are those paying the actual rates. So if you go out and you buy a house tomorrow and you're in a floodplain, you have to buy flood insurance, you're paying the typical flood insurance rate. If you have a neighbor who bought it prior to 1978, for instance, their flood insurance, or they bought flood insurance yesterday because the maps are changing tomorrow, okay, they can still stick with that preferred rate, okay, from being either pre-mapped or there even being maps. You paid a much lower. I had a property in Little Falls, and I was outside the flood zone, but I wanted to have flood insurance anyway because I was so close to the Peckman River. So my flood insurance was like $390. And then, because life is very ironic, I got moved into the flood zone. And I'm an engineer that does this professionally. It's not funny, but it happened. So I got moved into the flood zone. And initially, I still paid $400. And every year I was paying $400, but I didn't get their CRS discount.
Correct.
But then, because irony doesn't stop, my insurance rate started going up. And once I hit, I think it was about $2,100, yeah, I went back to the same rates as my neighbors, okay, because we all got moved into the flood zone, but I did get the discount
which is not as much as you guys get.
So what FEMA told me, though, it's just for any residents in that situation, if you're late on one payment for that grandfathered-in rate,
You lose it.
they will stop it immediately and jump you to the higher rate.
Yeah.
So if anything you do is don't get late on any payments for those, if you're grandfathered into a rate, because the next thing they do is just bring you to the top rate. So you'll be able to skate in with those lower rates as long as you keep your payments on time, that's
So
all.
I have a question, how that relates to the new mapping. So I've completely struck out with getting answers from my insurance company.
Okay.
And I suspect a lot of other people probably have or will also.
Always talk to an engineer. Go ahead.
Hopefully have better luck than me, but if you are continually, you have had an insurance policy, flood insurance policy, had the house for years and years, you paid on time all the time, now the maps are changing, your VFE is going up, or you are outside of the floodplain, but you maintain the policy, and now you're in. Are people in this situation, should we be expecting that when we renew, we're going to get smacked with an increase?
Yes. Yeah, again, the grandfathering has gone away.
Okay.
Okay, there are some limited cases where it still exists. Those people can count themselves lucky, but in most instances, like again, I was a personal example, my rental property in Little Falls, the rates started going up.
Do you know if there's a cap on how much they can increase in one shot?
The law's changed a few times. It was 17%. I'm not sure what it is right now. It was.
It's more than, I think it's something like 21 now.
It may have gone up. The law's been changed multiple times because it was extremely poorly received when it first happened.
I wonder why.
Yeah. Okay, and
Any questions about it?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Is there an interval that FEMA redoes the floodplain? So let's say you fight it, you get a
Yes.
LOMA, you get a certificate. What's the interval that they do the floodplain?
Sure. It's actually pretty consistent. It seems random when they come out because it takes so long to get them approved, but it's about every 10 years. 2007 was the last effective date. 2017, the new preliminary maps came out. We're in 2020 and they're just getting approved now. You look at Morris County, they're not even close to getting approved yet. I think they came out in 2015. So it is about a 10-year. There are a lot of exceptions, but it's about 10 years. And typically, you see what's happening here, which is, except for the floodway, that's odd. It got so much bigger, but the floodplain didn't change all that much, and I would expect the next cycle, same thing. Unless we have some unbelievable storm that resets the understanding of the 100, the floodplain should not get much larger again at the next cycle.
But if you appealed it this time around and it didn't change in 10 years, would you have to reappeal?
If you have a letter of map amendment or a letter of map revision, is what you're asking, are you going to have to do that again? That's a great question. It would only be, I believe, if your specific structure was affected by a change, meaning the line moved on your specific property. Okay. Yes?
What is the 100-year map based on?
Ah.
Is it based on 2011?
I like it. Okay, 100-year. 100-year is another way of saying the 100-year storm is it's the storm event that has a 1% chance of happening every year. And there's a couple ways they do that. The one, because we have so much gauge data, stream gauge data in New Jersey, those USGS gauges, what they'll do is they'll look at the period of record on that gauge, and they'll say, okay, based on a pretty simple statistical analysis, they'll figure out, okay, what storm will happen, what storm is there about a 1% chance of happening, what flood is there about 1% chance of happening on this river based on all those years of data. Now, Irene statistically was about the 100-year. It varied all over the state, but it was about 100-year. But it is not what dictated the mapping. A lot of people think that the mapping just pretty much are like, oh, Irene, and just traced wherever he said it flooded. Not really, but they did use that data when they were reanalyzing all the rivers, and that's part of the reason why the 100-year value went up a little bit, because if you don't have big storms on that gauge, your 1% storm might not be that big. But when you have Irene and Floyd and the '84 storm and Agnes and all these flood events, we have a pretty good set of big storms, which is one of the reasons why I think this borough is protected from a sudden map change, because you've had some really large events, and I can't see again a meteoric increase in the life of your floodplain. It's pretty well established now. I got to talk about the 100-year. That's cool. Again, LOMERS, a letter of map revision or a letter of map amendment. We already talked about that. That's something you can even file yourself. You absolutely don't need to have a surveyor or an engineer do it. Once you get your EC, your elevation certificate, Or you look at it and say, I am just not in this flood zone. They're wrong, the blue line's just clipping the edge of my lot and block boundary. You file a letter of map amendment, an LOMA. Again, it's something you can do online. And with that, I thank you for your time and your willingness to listen to an engineer talk about floodplains.
And one more thing I just want to ask, and Lauren, you can help me with this. You know, with the new data, he was just talking about the gauges, and you can talk about the gauges a little bit. You can go online through our webpage, correct? And monitor all the gauges on the river from NOAA, which gives you a prediction. Now, that's just a prediction on cresting and how the water will be in the next couple of days after a flood event.
Okay, so
You got- you speak
they're
about
not all predictive. Okay, so to get to the river gauges, you can either go to the flood advisory boards. Yeah, you know what? Plug in instead?
Oh, do you want to just jump on?
Oh, you can do it from yours if you want. I have a page up. It might be
Which one is it?
the borough website page, pomptonlakes-nj.gov.
So those gauges, while they're pulling that up, you can actually chart the river live time. So if you know what the peaks are, it kind of helps you judge what you have to do. In the old days, we used to put a stick in the ground and see how far the water went up and then move the stick. Well, this is now the new stick.
Two ways you can get to it. From the flood readiness along the side, this is the OEM's page. Along here, there's a stream gauges link, which gives you some information, and looks like we only have 2 gauges on this page. The other way to get to it is to go through community and go to the flood advisory boards. There we are. So the flood advisory boards page, and we have some information. Our Facebook feed is also embedded in this page, so you can come here and see what we're up to there. And we have our river gauges. So from any of these links, it will take you to, it'll open a new window and take you to the river gauge. Some of them are predictive. The Ramapo is predictive. It means it gives you what the prediction is for by that gauge. Could be.
Yeah, it's not exact science.
It's an idea. If you've been watching the Ramapo gauge, you understand why some of us laugh a little bit at that. Some of them, the Pequannock River one is not predictive. The Pequannock River one at Riverdale, to keep in mind, this is upstream of where the Wanacue and the Pequannock come together at Van Ness Bridge. So this is upstream of Carlo Field. So this gauge can be a little deceiving. Sometimes it says everything's just fine while the water is getting awfully close to top of bank at Carlo Field. The Flood Advisory Board has been working with the borough on, and our OEM coordinator's been helping out quite a bit with trying to get a new gauge on the Pequannock after the confluence with the Wanacue to help us get a better idea. It's a difficult thing because we're asking the federal government to spend money to install something that's really only going to benefit our community. But we're still trying.
And in those there, it's a lot of information. You can see the 10 highest events in the last 100 years, list them in orders. You know, you can compare numbers. It's a good resource to use on time when you're not in a flood zone. When it's raining, this is not the time to go study the map.
It's good to familiarize yourself with these sites. So I was doing some updating, and hopefully later tonight or tomorrow, once we can get one of our page admins to approve it, we should have the link to the Map Service Center on this page of the borough website, on the Flood Advisory Board's page. And Nick, if you want to just take through on here while we have this up.
Yeah, if you want to check it, on your own, which I think is a good idea. Again, because of the fact that the maps aren't effective until April 2020, it's a little bit of digging, but it's not too bad. So if I wanted to check out what's going on in Pompton Lakes, you go to, again, the link is in the PowerPoint presentation. And I go show all products. What's nice about this is all the buttons are big. And again, you see, and this is where you know right away, and like I said, a couple magic numbers for you. It says, it's displaying the 2007 maps down here, which doesn't help you at all. So if you go to show all products, pending products, that's you guys, pending. And if you check it, and if I'm right, which I am on occasion, let's go. Burn pal. Yes. All right. April 17th, 2020, the maps are loaded, and they're all viewable files. So if you click on any of these, you can go ahead and look. It takes a little bit. IND is an index. Let me grab that one. This will help you figure out which one you need to go to.
Nick, we can make it a little easy. The 181 panel, if you're in the south end, of town, so the south side of
That's what's going
town,
up.
it's the 181 panel. So that's what you want, the one that ends in 181.
So, I'll make it sick. Wanacue, Isca.
Quick question, how many people here are here this evening because you got the reverse phone call this afternoon? Please raise your hand. Okay. All right, make sure, please, that your neighbors and your friends are signed up for that. Sign up right on the homepage of the website, not just for meetings like this, but for emergencies. Very important you're on there.
And to everyone here tonight, this is the index map in the center. You can see it right there, 143, 144, 182, and 181. It's all these right here. These are the Pompton Lakes maps right here. So when you go back to that prior, which again, I'd implore you, if you think you're in or near a flood zone, here they are here, you can pull them up and take a look. They load a little slowly because you've seen the new flood maps. They're very large. They've got the aerial photo and a lot of color and stuff like that. But that's about it. If at any point you're just frustrated and like, I don't know where to find this, I hate this, my email address is at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. It's always welcome. Drop me an email. Just put in the subject line Pompton Lakes, and I'll try to have one of my engineers or myself just send you back a copy of the flood map specific to your property. Just list your address. Okay? We'll get back to it as fast as we can. Sometimes we're a little slow. Being honest. That's it. That's all I got, Lauren.
Any questions? This is a chance to answer questions. Thank you for your help with everything.
Mike? It's almost like you know what you're doing. It's amazing. How are you, sir?
Everybody, huh? Everybody, okay?
Good, very good.
Yeah, good. Everything's okay?
Brothers in South Carolina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, good. My daughter's getting married.
Oh, really? Oh, wonderful.